Asked in the schools to go do a presentation on treaties and what it means, like the meaning of the Mi'kmaq flag, for instance, and the colors and why they use that, and the Mi'kmaq Grand Council system and how it operates. So, like it's divided into three parts. Like you got the local chief, and you got the district chief, and you have the grand chief, who kind of like presides over districts all throughout the Atlantic region. 7 districts that are spread out over the what is now known as these provinces of part of Quebec, here in New Brunswick, PEI, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and also spreading into across the border to northern Maine, and going as far down as linking up with the rest of the Wabanakis all the way down to Massachusetts. So that's the extent of the power of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council, and tying with the Wabanakis, of course. So, which is Mi'kmaq, Wapna'kikewi'skwaq, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Abenaki. These 5 tribes joined together. They formed a political autonomy and a clout to also to form a confederacy, that in times of war they would come together and work with each other. So that's what happened throughout history that took place, actually, which kind of landed us what is known today as the Friendship Treaty, because of the revolution that was going on in the States and with Canada and that too. So yeah, played a very important role in the landing of the Mi'kmaq treaty, as they call it, Friendship Treaty, as they call it. But the Wabanakis were part and parcel of the negotiations that were taking place. And some of the writings that they took place each time that they sat down and they wrote down notes, right? I've seen some of those notes from one of the captains that passed away there. He was from Shubenacadie, and his name was Frank Nivens. And he had parchment paper about that thick, and writings that they used to have during the times when they had these meetings, right? Dated and everything, and what they talked about. So there's a lot of names, places, that are relevant in those discussions, when they talk about Siganiktuk and that whole area of the 6th district, which was a crucial point of travel from PEI and traveling through that little pass that they have there down in Siganiktuk, down towards just before you get to Nova Scotia, and it was a very strategic navigational point to get together, and a lot of tribes would meet there, like Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and Mi'kmaq, and they would make decisions on how things were happening when it comes to war and stuff. Of course, they traveled a lot by canoe, so that was the fastest means of travel. They can travel by canoe right to PEI and even Newfoundland. They had sails on some of their canoes. So the Newfoundland people were also involved in the ownership of territory in that area. But of course, that became a strategic position for the Europeans when they came here to settle for fishing and other industry that they wanted to apply in their claiming of territory and lands and stuff. The Grand Council system was very effective initially when they were practicing the politics of the land as it were back then. They had a very powerful way of conducting business, if you will, with other nations and so on. And though a lot of stuff was done on wampum, with our agreements with the Mohawks and the other tribes that were around us, right, including within our Wabanaki territories, we always respected each other's area and where they lived. So this traditional system carried on for quite a while, until, of course, more and more encroachment of European settlement and setting up of their government started making changes to the way things were understood to be in relationship with the settlements that they put up. And so more and more we wind up kind of being corralled into areas where they considered to be reserves. So when the government was set up here in Canada and they set into that Indian Act on how to address the Indigenous people in this country, they set up this Indian Act to deal with the rights of the Indigenous people across Canada. And in fact, they went ahead and started documenting who is and who is not an Indian through blood quantums. And so this is where it started becoming difficult for a lot of our leaders at the time to understand, because we found only later on that a lot of it was done fairly, and a lot of the decisions that they were making in their politics, in setting up politics in this country, they left us out of the negotiations. So the duty to consult kind of process that should have been in place was not. So as a result, we got left out on a lot of the real key and important decision making when it comes to education, when it comes to our people having protection of our rights, human rights especially. So a lot of that was they just went ahead and did whatever they wanted to do, and they felt that they didn't need to consult with the Indigenous people, and they wanted to just kind of assimilate us into the body politic of the Canadian government as they saw fit. So, but they always wind up having to come back to the treaty, because once the treaty was mentioned in the House of Lords in Britain, because every time they passed any kind of legislation here in Canada back in the early times, before the Indian Act, they had to go to Europe in the House of Lords there in Britain to ratify any kind of legislation that was going to be enacted here in Canada and dealing with Indigenous people. And so when that treaty was drawn up and then it was signed and taken over to the House of Lords, it started back in the late 1600s, leading up to into the early 1700s. Started the 1700s. About 1726, they had a formal draft ready to be signed, but then the skirmishes took place because they had, some disputes that were happening in that area. So they held off until 1752, and by then those skirmishes were settled, because there was a lot of disputes that were going on, a lot of fights over the fur trade, because the French and the English were having their wars over ownership of territory. So then it became part of their vocabulary in the House of Lords when they talk about the Treaty of 1752, the treaty with the Mi'kmaq Nation and the Wabanakis. He's kind of included in there as well. Though the Wabanakis had their own autonomy as well to operate under their own, but then we got divided by these territories they call provinces, and then we had borders from Canada and the United States. The War of 1812 kind of like set into place on how that was going to be, and other treaties had to be signed because our people were our nation was involved in some of the disputes that was taking place there, hired as scouts or being part of protection of certain territories and so on. And when our people were involved in that. So they're mentioned quite a bit in some of the historical information right now that is being talked about when they talk about duty to consult and reclaiming the ownership of names of our lands and territories. And so we have organizations like MTI who does a lot of research and studies and bring up those important information to talk about when presenting things to the government. So it's higher education and it's better education for our people as time comes right up until today. So that the nature of the Grand Council changed to into the Indian Act. Under the Indian Act, the Grand Council kind of took a step back and was no longer recognized as the go-to people to talk about politics of the land. So the Indian Act chiefs, as they're known as the Indian Act chiefs, because under the Indian Act, when they established that, the government would only deal with the chiefs, Indian Act chiefs. They didn't necessarily go to the Grand Council for permission to do things or whatever, or talk about rights and so on. So the Grand Council weren't in the mindset of going to war at the first drop of a gauntlet or whatever. They say, okay, we know that this is about peace and friendship. They're stuck by the rule of peace and friendship. We live side by side, and we still will maintain that idea that you are on our land and you're living on our land and under peace and friendship. So it's unceded territory. It was never taken by war in any way. So it's understood to be that even still today, and it's coming out even more and making a stronger statement when you have members of parliament or even people in the government recognizing that and saying, we are on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and just letting everybody know that that is recognized and understood. So the modern way of operating the Grand Council system, which changed and over a period of time, there's a Grand Chief Member Tool, like back in 1610, kind of started changing that concept of our people accepting the missionaries' work and what they were doing, because it had to do with family. Saint Anne was the mother of Mary, Mary being the mother of Jesus, which is the Messiah or the Savior, and the teachings directly from the Creator. So we understood that already. So it was very similar. So it was easy to I don't want to say assimilate, but eventually it was heading in that direction. It was easy to accept the missionaries' work and what they were doing. So it kind of supported that, and when he himself got baptized, that made a powerful statement right throughout Mi'kmaq and all of Wabanaki Nation, that we would accept the missionaries' their philosophy and what they were teaching, not necessarily their methods. Their methods were crude in a lot of ways, and sometimes they would take it upon their own to do whatever the hell they wanted to do, because they're given that access to do that, right? So some of these missionaries were taking advantage of the situation, sort of thing, and advantage of the people, and using the people for their own gain in that way. So that's documented history as well. There's stories about that, which eventually came out to what is now known as we're at with reconciliation, and when they're talking about all the abuses that have done to Indigenous people here in this continent, and especially here in Canada, we can attest to that, those atrocities that has been committed by the church and state, by the government as well. The government was behind a lot of it. So the government did a Royal Commission study on itself back in the 80s, and they found, through all of the information put together, they found that they were liable for the damages they caused on Indigenous people. And how is it going to punish itself? Government is going to slap itself in the face? No. Or in the hand or anything? No. What government does is what government does. Is going to give out money or programs and stuff like that, right? And so they admitted that they were liable to those damages, and they have to come out with those. And so they came out with this what they call today is reconciliation process. So, and they came up with the 94, 95, maybe somewhere around there, calls to justice that they have to at least address, and in every part of our dealings with the government. So they have to comply to that, and they're just, I mean, the door has just been opened to that, and there's a lot of things that are happening, and we're starting to see, finally people are recognizing, realizing who we are as a people and as a nation, and we are given an open door sort of thing to express our opinions and express even our culture. Our traditions, customs, and values were kind of weighed down because of some of the missionaries at the time, that they didn't want that to get too strong, because the people will come back, right? And it's happening, and the traditional values and that are being revived by a lot of the ones who practice traditional knowledge is getting to the point now where the youth are hands-on and starting to make a difference in everyday society, interacting with non-native people that are, and a lot of them are very interested in wanting to know the good values and the good teachings that are part of the culture, and they participate in the ceremonies and things that we're doing, like powwows or sweat lodge or ceremonies that we do, for healing. And they're keenly interested, and they want to see that part of it, because it's the end result is good for everyone. And so that in itself speaks to the truth, of reconciliation. So the Grand Council system, I mean, like you can go back into 1610 when Grand Chief Member 2 was baptized. He was over 100 years old, probably 110 years old, maybe more. I used to say he was 120 years old. In some of the documents and writings they say it, because they weren't really sure. But a year later, exactly almost a year later to the date that he was baptized, that's when he passed away. But when he passed away, they did a ceremony in his honor. They killed 6 dogs. And they ate dogs back then. Mi'kmaq ate dogs as part of the ceremony for a feast when somebody has passed away. Because he was a grand chief, there was a lot more of them involved, and a lot more people participating in the feast. And there's a whole story behind that one too, about a time when our people were going through a famine, and the dogs are the ones that saved the lives of the people that were remaining, and told them, you can eat us. You buried your dead in shallow graves, and we ate them. That's why we're healthy. But now you can eat us, and you'll get through the famine. So that's why the dog's always been a man's best friend. But at the same time, they survived a Holocaust. There were famines in the ancient times as they were like in this day and age. So I don't know if we're heading towards another climate change is happening. Those are the modern things that are happening today. But some of these are like chiefs that were in place, like Grand Chief Member 2. He was a prophet. He could see things ahead, right? And this is why he had himself and all his family baptized, knowing that the church was going to be like a shield for us, because when they started setting their foot in the land here, because a lot of our people were dying off with smallpox. It was a foreign disease. A lot of people just died in a very short time. Thousands, tens of thousands, probably even millions. It spread so fast, and all they had to do was just go home, come back in a couple of years, and practically everybody's all dead. And but the people still survived, and but now because of their encroachment, they brought boatloads and boatloads of people over here. Our population here in the Mi'kmaq population, which probably was in the millions back then, after the disease had hit, everything, it weakened the strength of our population, of our people. And so now we're down to, I dare to say there's maybe about 30,000 people here in the province of New Brunswick, and same with Nova Scotia. PEI less than that. There's a small number of communities. Like one time, PEI was covered with Mi'kmaq people, and today you could put a picture of PEI map on the wall and throw a dart, and you take the dart off of there, and there's a little hole there. You throw it again. You throw it maybe about 3 times or 4 times, and you look at those holes, and you look at the size of PEI, and those little holes that you made with the dart. Those are the reserves there. The Mi'kmaq people living there now. That's Scotchford. There's Lennox Island. Rocky Point. These small communities, and there may be about 200, maybe 300 people in every one of those communities. The rest of the island is covered with European settlers, right? So that's the difference in the displacements of a population as a result of diseases and a result of war that was brought over here. But they never, in other words, our people never forgot, hey, don't we have a treaty? We have a treaty, that relationship, right? It's very important, that we maintain that we have a treaty and we have a relationship. A treaty is like a marriage. 2 people married, they have to get along. And you have to work things out all throughout your lives till both of you pass on. And hopefully we'll not pass on. We'll just continue on going. So we just keep that going, right? That relationship. And so to maintain the Grand Council system, because it changed now to the Indian Act, Indian Act chiefs are being more representative for political and the issues of the people, dealing with the issues of the people, and the government is funding all the programs and providing the money for means to live for our people. It's their fiduciary responsibility as a government to do that. The Grand Council now, it's kind of like a spiritual body, but maintains this whole documented history and speaks of it, and they have Treaty Day every year and talk about that and do a commemorating that event every year. The Grand Chiefs listed here, like back in 1729 to 1818 was Francis Peck. This is the known Grand Chief from after Grand Chief Membertou, which was 1610. I mean, almost 100 years after. Francis Peck was Grand Chief. Okay, and from 1818 to 1842, it was Michael Toma. From that time, and from 1842, taken from there, 1842 to 1869, not very long, Frank Toma Jr. So it seemed like it was hereditary, from one family member to another. And here, John Dennis, 1869 to 1887. Again, not a very long time, like about 20-some years. And then 1856 to 1895, it was Jacques Pierre Benoit Paul. So this would be my ancestors, one of my ancestors. So we had a connection with the Grand Council system that way. And then John Denny Jr. back in 1887 to 1918, which was probably the last time they had a hereditary chief in place. These were done through a hereditary traditional system of putting a Grand Chief in place. And after that, it was Gabriel Sillyboy from 1918 to 1964. that started with the new way of selecting a Grand Chief, and it was through voting. We had a voting system. It was very similar to how they chose a pope, because the Grand Chief now is a spiritual body, so they would make a decision, and they would. I don't know how the Pope does it, but I think they would look at some stacks, and there's white smoke comes up or whatever. The Pope has been chosen or whatever. And from 1964 to 1991, he was Donald Marshall Sr. Donald Marshall Sr., and whose son was Donald Marshall Jr., who actually went and fought a case about our hunting and fishing rights, and it was fishing eel spearing that he did. He was caught, taken to court, and then he had to go to the Supreme Court, which brought out not just the Indian Act, but he brought out the 1752 treaty that proved that the 1752 treaty still stands, still legal, still effective, and is part of Canadian law. So he won his case, and that opened the door to what it says in the treaty: fur, fish, and fowl, to be able to harvest and take the resources that we are part of on Mi'kmaq. And Mi'kmaq is still everything here in all these provinces because it's unceded territory, even though they say this province, that territory, this one lives here, owns this land, the Hatfields and McCoys, don't get on my land or I'll blast you, sort of thing, right? Still, the concept is there that, it's unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq or Wolastoqiyik. Benjamin Sealy Boy, okay, now Donald Marshall died in 1991. Benjamin Sealy Boy came in as the next Grand Chief. He died not too long ago. He died in 2017. And the most recent Grand Chief that we have now is Norman Sealy Boy. It's almost hereditary when they do it like that, but it's almost like going back to a hereditary process, but he was still chosen through election process. And he is now the reigning Grand Chief of all of Mi'kmaq. So that speaks loud about where we stand as Indigenous people in our governance and how that's being respected today. Through these court cases that we had. My father was one of them. My father had to go to the Supreme Court to fight his case, and that was the beaver pelt he had in his trunk of his car. A warden caught him off the reserve and he said, I'm going to charge you for that. I said, okay, let's go to court. He went to the provincial court and lost and had to pay a fine. And they had confiscated the beaver pelt. And at the time, Union of New Brunswick in 1981 was just newly formed. And Graydon Nicholas was their lawyer. He was just out of law school. And they took on this case right away. They got together people that were chiefs that were like-minded and were interested in and they had a trend going on, said Indianism, let's all be Indian, go towards the Indians rather than Indian and follow the Indian affairs and being pat on the back Indians. We're going to go for our rights. So they got together and they did a genealogy and a study on my father to see that he was indeed one of the members of the Miramichi Indians, because in the Miramichi area here, that's where he was arrested. And they did a genealogy on my father, and I was telling you about with Paul. There's a link to one of the ones that signed the treaty, and was involved in the Grand Count chieftainship all throughout the years. So that in itself gave precedence over any decision that was already made with the provincial courts. So the federal overrides provincial, and my father's case was turned over, and they had to release the pelt and get money back for the fine that he paid. And to this day, the pelt still remains, and it was put in a museum over there in Boys Town, where it shows a picture of him with the beaver pelt. And they call it the most expensive beaver pelt in New Brunswick because the court case at the time and research and everything they did came up to $25,000. Back in 1981, you know, that's a lot of money back then, you know. So they call it the $25,000 beaver pelt, but it's there at the museum in Boys Town. And a lot of people don't know that, but I mean, maybe through here we can channel some people and find out some of that information that's relevant to, you know, our governance and our rights and who we are as a Mi'kmaq nation. And hopefully, you know, some of this information can be part of the learning that's happening today, you know, with treaty education.
Gegemi